Films like Let Me In and Only Lovers Left Alive offer a unique perspective and glimpses into the intricacies of everlasting life, while others like What We Do in the Shadows infuse the vampire narrative with a lighthearted touch of humor. And both kinds are equally beautiful to watch.
Listen to them.
However, the genesis of these cinematic marvels owes its gratitude to Bram Stoker's seminal work. Stoker's literary masterpiece gave the world a character of unparalleled iconic status in the form of the truly timeless villain, Dracula. Through the passage of time, Dracula's legacy has been reimagined and brought to life on the silver screen and the small screen in countless iterations. In this video, we will embark on a journey through the eerie and monstrous darkness inhabited by Dracula. So if you're a Dracula fan, you just have to catch these 11 most powerful Dracula versions ever. Let's begin, shall we? Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you, let's begin. Vlad Dracula from Dracula Untold 2014. Count Dracula, portrayed in the crazy role by Luke Evans in Dracula Untold, was a character steeped in ancient legend and an unsettling thirst for power. Driven by the desire to protect his kingdom and son from the relentless invaders led by Mehmed II, Dracula's path collided with the oldest of vampires, Gaius Julius Caesar, a most evil entity who was cursed and tricked for eternity by a demon, probably one who was served by Satan. So after the demon's betrayal, Gaius found himself trapped within Broken Tooth Mountain, which was the dire consequence of his blood-fueled Faustian pact. Driven by desperation, Gaius seizes the opportunity to turn another into a vampire, and Vlad III Tepes turned out to be the perfect candidate because of his cold and resolute nature. To carry out the deed, Gaius takes a skull and fills it with his own blood to Vlad, which would transfer his very essence to Vlad. The scene was nothing short of a haunting spectacle. After the supernatural exchange, Vlad got strength beyond his measure, swiftness equating to a shooting star, dominion over night creatures, and the augmented senses of the nocturnal animals. Furthermore, Vlad could transform into a swarm of bats at will, apart from the ability to summon them. Yet this power comes at a great price, and Vlad develops a ferocious bloodlust, which is no surprise, to be honest. While many tend to discard Luke Evans' Dracula, I personally feel he is one of the best Draculas there are. Someone who is a victim of his circumstances, but also someone who is almost proud of his affliction. Dracula from Castlevania. In Netflix's Castlevania, Count Dracula was revered for his unparalleled intellect and strength within the series universe. Driven by an unshakable belief in his superiority over humans, he often dismissed them as mere peasants, his apathy rooted in his overwhelming power. This manifested further in his merciless acts of brutality, leaving behind a trail of carnage and blood-soaked places. Yet beneath this veneer of indifference lies a complex character who deserves mercy for those innocent or those who did not challenge his dominion. While the show doesn't extensively delve into the pre-vampire life and backstory, it's established that Dracula finds solace in solitude within his castle. His detachment from humanity is further solidified by their growing fear of him, which compels them to avoid being in his vicinity. Having said that, his heart is not impervious to emotions and love. The arrival of a persistent and inquisitive medical researcher named Lisa at his doorstep transforms his heart to an extent, if at all he had one. Initially resistant, Dracula becomes enamored by Elisa's intellect, civility, and courage. Their bond deepens, culminating in marriage and the birth of their son, Alucard. Tragedy shatters Dracula's newfound happiness when Lisa is unjustly accused of witchcraft and executed during his absence. The darkness that ensues from this loss fuels an immortal vendetta against humanity, and he promises to return with a horde of night creatures. As his murderous campaign takes shape, he assembles an army and appoints vampire generals. However, his ultimate goal of eradicating humanity was a decision that would also spell doom for his own kind, and it ended up triggering dissension among his ranks. The turning point arrives when his own son, Alucard, confronts him. While his power could easily extinguish the life of Alucard, he spares him, recognizing the righteousness of his son's cause. Dracula from Bram Stoker's Dracula 1992 film. Francis Ford Coppola's adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula brought a refreshing and masterful take on the iconic character, distancing itself from the campy B-movies that had come before it, tarnishing the names of vampires. This film, widely acclaimed for its screenplay, narrative depth, and gothic romance infusion, stands out as a cinematic triumph. But maybe the same couldn't be said about Keanu Reeves' performance. The tale weaves around Count Dracula, portrayed in an unforgettable way by Gary Oldman. A unique departure from the set norma, the film casts Dracula as a Romanian warrior who was part of the Christian forces against the Ottoman Empire in 1462. Following a victorious battle, the tragic news of his demise led to the despairing suicide of his beloved wife, Elisabetta. Grief-stricken and tormented by her supposed damnation due to suicide, Dracula's anger towards God and a desperate act at the chapel's cross sealed his transformation into the undead. You see, he struck his sword into the chapel's stone cross, which caused it to spill blood. He drank this blood and collapsed to his death, only to return back as Dracula the Vampire. Resurfacing in the 19th century as Count Dracula, he crosses paths with Jonathan Harker, a solicitor. Upon seeing Harker's fiancée Mina, bearing a striking resemblance to Elisabetta, Dracula's obsession with her takes shape. He imprisons Harker and embarks on a journey to London aboard the Demeter, a ship he leaves drained of life. In London, he encounters Lucy Westenra, drawing her into his dark thrall but not immediately ending her life. Assuming the alias Prince Vlad of Zekli, he meets Mina, who eventually departs for Romania for Harker. Clearly, this enrages Dracula beyond measure. In the end, it is revealed that Mina was, in fact, a reincarnation of Elisabetta, and that she remembered her past life. However, he dies in his vampiric form at the same chapel where he once denounced God, and Mina decapitates the vampire. The film boasts a stellar ensemble cast, with Gary Oldman's Dracula, Winona Ryder's Mina, Anthony Hopkins as Abraham Van Helsing, and Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker. You should definitely watch the film if you haven't. Count Vladislaus III, Dracula from Van Helsing, 2004. Portrayed by Richard Roxburgh, Count Dracula in the film Van Helsing is another interesting version. Born in 1422 as the son of Valerius the Elder, a revered Transylvanian knight, Dracula's existence takes a fateful turn when he is slain by the left hand of God. But of course, his tale doesn't conclude there. He forges a sinister pact with the fallen son of God, thus gaining a second chance at life alongside a cursed dependency on human blood for sustenance. You know, just the good old vampire things. Dracula's resurrection leads to a familial rift as his father, Valerius the Elder, is disgraced by his unholy alliance and vows to end his lineage's restlessness until Dracula is vanquished. Centuries later, driven by his desire to resurrect his progeny, Dracula manipulates Dr. Frankenstein into creating life from death. Despite Dracula's efforts, the key to realizing his offspring's rebirth, Frankenstein's monster, escapes his grasp. The narrative shifts to the present day where Dracula awakens and resumes his quest to bring his children to life. Van Helsing, who had previously defeated Dracula as the left hand of God, becomes his primary adversary. Assisted by people connected to Valerius's legacy, including Anna and Velkin, the battle becomes rageful. Dracula's seemingly impervious nature is challenged as Van Helsing's werewolf venom proves to be his ultimate downfall. While the film incorporates various elements from classic Universal monsters, including Frankenstein's monster, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, its interpretation of Dracula received some criticism from both fans and critics. Roxburgh's portrayal deviates from the traditional charismatic and cunning Count, instead presenting a more brutish and physically imposing figure. Dracula's pursuit of creating offspring and his transformation into a massive and monstrous bat-like creature further diverge from the established character traits. Alucard from Hellsing anime. Alucard, featured in the Hellsing anime series, was definitely one of the more complex Draculas we've ever seen on screen. Originally known as the Count Dracula or Vlad III Dracula, he was born in 1431 and later gained notoriety as Vlad Tepes or Vlad the Impaler. His reputation spread far and wide, eventually leading him to become arguably the first vampire in existence. In a flashback, Alucard's harrowing past is revealed, and it is told that he was enslaved during his childhood by Ottoman conquerors. He endured unspeakable torment while he defiantly clutched a silver cross. Upon becoming the Voivode of Wallachia, His thirst for revenge led him into a conflict with the Turks. Though facing defeat, his transformation into a vampire granted him a new existence, which was obviously marked by unyielding power and, quite curiously, a shattered silver cross. The story then shifts to 1897, intertwining with Bram Stoker's Dracula. Over 400 years later, Alucard is tamed and repurposed by Abraham van Helsing. Becoming the Helsing family's loyal agent, he adopts the new name Alucard, granted by Arthur Helsing, and embarks on missions with a young Walter C. Dornez. Alucard's characterization centers around his immortality, invincibility, and profound arrogance. He taunts adversaries with impunity, often allowing them to inflict severe injuries before healing himself and unleashing his own devastating blows. His chilling method of allowing himself to be dismembered, only to reconstitute, becomes somewhat of a signature tactic. Alucard's opponents are not merely defeated, they are shattered. His confrontations illustrate his capacity to inflict psychological torment alongside physical harm. Despite his overwhelming strength, his overconfidence occasionally leaves him vulnerable to surprise attacks. The complexity of Alucard's character is further highlighted by his loyalty to Helsing organization and his master Integra. While obedient to her orders, he remains willing to exterminate human enemies with ruthless efficiency. His profound power is also intertwined with the desire to find an opponent who can match him. However, beneath his arrogance lies a deeper emotional surface. Alucard's longevity has granted him a perspective on the value of life and death. He regrets his monstrous transformation and the pursuit of power that accompanied it, and this sorrow is palpable as he observes the passage of time and encounters others who mirror his past mistakes. Dracula from the Last Voyage of the Demeter, 2023. In The Last Voyage of the Demeter, Dracula is presented in a fairly distinct Stephen King manner. He's not charming or comedic in The Last Voyage of Demeter and has returned to his core horror essence. And to be honest, I don't mind this menacing and demonic version of the character. Dracula's appearance in the movie is simply nightmarish, with disfigured and sharpened teeth that swiftly draw blood from his victims. His emaciated and pale face and skin accentuate his eerie and otherworldly nature. As the film progresses, his transformation intensifies, culminating in a final form that exudes a demonic aura, with bat-like wings and the whole charade. Interestingly, this portrayal of Dracula remains unaltered when he interacts with humans, choosing not to hide behind the charm and suave appearances which other on-screen Draculas have loved to do. Instead, he relies on fear, intimidation, and force to exert control, which is probably how the classic literary monster should be. This Dracula is a lurking and shadowy presence, haunting the vessel as he stealthily preys upon his victims, one poor soul a night. His modus operandi is reminiscent of his portrayal in Chapter 7 of the source material, and the fleeting glimpses heighten the sense of dread. Dracula's physical depiction in the film aligns more with the unsettling figures of horror, resembling a fusion of Nosferatu and Kurt Barlow from Salem's Lot. Bald, hairless, and bony, he radiates an animalistic and feral demeanor that emphasizes his sinister nature. While this interpretation diverges from the traditional image of Dracula, it effectively reinvigorates the character's terrifying existence. I understand that this is not how the source material depicts its own Dracula, but I guess a fresh perspective doesn't hurt much. Another important difference between the book and the film's Dracula is that the latter's actions bear an innate sense of recklessness and unpredictability, and he remains a more primal and aggressive creature, and not some sophisticated monster like Hannibal Lecter. His kills are brutal and far from calculated or methodical in approach. Drake from Blade Trinity, 2004. In Marvel's Blade movies, the character Drake, portrayed by Dominic Purcell, is the franchise's version of Dracula, and Blade himself proved to be a hero earning a lot of love before guys like Iron Man and Captain America came into the picture. Unlike the classic portrayal of Dracula, the movie's incarnation of the Prince of Darkness is known by the name Drake. While the original Blade film was acclaimed, its sequel failed to capture the same essence, and to make things worse, Drake's character suffered from lackluster execution. Drake's transformations into a CGI-rendered monster lacked visual authenticity. I understand that CGI back in the day wasn't as good as it is today, but the monster version of Drake made Justice League's Superman look like a piece of art. In the Blade universe, Drake is the progenitor of all vampires, referred to as Homine Nocturnae. These creatures, led by Drake, have historically terrorized humanity. According to the film's lore, Drake's origins date back around 7,000 years, to the Mesopotamian civilization where he was worshipped as Dagon by the Babylonians. Disillusioned by the world's modern ways, he remained dormant for ages within an Iraqi tomb. As the Western culture became entrenched in vampire tales, the vampires Danica and Asher Talos sought to awaken Drake from his millennia-old tomb. Once awakened, Drake, possessing Daywalker abilities much like Blade's, posed some serious threat to humanity. Now, while Drake's portrayal left room for improvement, the 2024 Blade film, starring Mahershala Ali as the titular character, seems rather promising a prospect for revitalizing the vampire-themed franchise. Count Orlok from Nosferatu, 1922. Count Orlok, the iconic OG vampire from the 1922 film Nosferatu, has to be called the true testament to timeless horror. Created a century ago, this German adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula adheres closely to the source material, while introducing distinct visual traits that amplify the character's monstrous nature. Orlok's appearance is both eerie and distinctive, complete with long, claw-like hands and fanged teeth. His elongated fingers and pronounced nose exaggerate the original aquiline features, which only help in elevating his sinister aura. Bald and a proud owner of pointy ears, Orlok's physical manifestation leans into a more grotesque depiction than that of the refined portrayals seen in later adaptations. Born from the lineage of one of Satan's lieutenants, Orlok has been rooted in darkness. Residing in a dilapidated castle in the remote reaches of Carpathia, he sustains himself by preying upon the local populace. Posing as a nobleman from the Carpathian Mountains, Orlok later reaches this German city of Wisborg, where he brings forth a plague of death. Later, Thomas Hutter, a real estate agent, journeys to Orlok's castle to fulfill a task. Escaping in a crate filled with soil from his homeland, Orlok embarks on a ship, claiming the lives of all on board. Only the ship's captain and first mate escape the onslaught, but even they end up meeting grim fates shortly after. Once in Wisborg, Orlok fixates on Hutter's wife, Ellen, as he stalks and attacks her. His obsession leads him to his doom as the sun's rays obliterate him. In a moment of poetic justice, Orlok's demise comes as he turns to smoke, dissolving into the dawn's light.
Good evening, Count Dracula.
Count Dracula from Dracula 2020 TV series, portrayed by Claes Bang in BBC's 2020 miniseries. This guy is probably my personal favorite. Dracula receives a refreshing change that pays homage to the character's timeless legacy. While drawing inspiration from the Count's iconic predecessors, Claes Bang infuses the role with his own originality, thanks in part to the creative writing of Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat. The story begins as Jonathan Harker, an undead man, is rescued from the waters and questioned by Agatha Van Helsing, an expert on vampirism. Harker recounts his encounter with Count Dracula, an aged yet extremely charismatic man from Transylvania. Dracula, intrigued by Harker, enlists him to teach him English and culture. But unbeknownst to Harker, Dracula was drinking his blood. Harker's health deteriorates as Dracula grows stronger, sustaining himself with Harker's blood. Eventually escaping the Count's castle, Harker finds refuge under the care of Sister Agatha Van Helsing. Dracula, unable to enter without invitation, manipulates Harker into inviting him, leading to a grisly massacre at the convent. In a subsequent episode, Dracula journeys to England aboard the Demeter, a ship carrying an assortment of passengers. Strategically selected by Dracula, these individuals become victims as he feeds and unleashes chaos. Meanwhile, Agatha is kept in a dreamlike state by Dracula, but she awakens and orchestrates an explosion that seals Dracula at the ocean's depths. Resurfacing in 2020, Dracula is inadvertently revived by Dr. Zoe Van Helsing's actions. He is captured but later released by a lawyer representing him. Dracula comes to realize the emptiness of his existence and ends his life by consuming Zoe's cancerous blood.
Selena, what are you doing?
Dracula from Dracula 2000. At the beginning of the new millennium, the legend of Dracula was revisited with a modern twist, and Dracula 2000 was born. Directed by Wes Craven, renowned for his contributions to horror films, the movie took creative liberties with the classic tale, and a few of these didn't fit well with the audience. The story introduces Matthew Van Helsing, a descendant of the famed Abraham Van Helsing, who manages an antique shop in London. His seemingly mundane life takes a jog to the left when his secretary, Selena, leads a group of thieves to the shop's secure underground vault. Instead, they inadvertently release a coffin sealed with silver, unleashing the infamous Prince of Darkness, Dracula himself. Interestingly, it is revealed that Matthew is, in fact, the original Van Helsing, having prolonged his existence by consuming Dracula's blood in limited quantities. As for Dracula, the film presents him as Judas Iscariot, forever cursed to roam the earth due to his betrayal of Jesus, a punishment that renders him vulnerable to silver. This portrayal of Dracula in this rendition is kind of special because of the long black hair and exposed chest, which was probably something that the vampires and werewolves in the Twilight Saga got inspired by. While the film attempts to infuse the character with intrigue, the execution falls short in some aspects, resulting in a blend of uneven acting.
Apologize. I assumed you knew. I am Dracula.
The Dark Lord from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Dracula, portrayed in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, seemed like a fine blend of charisma and vanity. He exuded an air of self-assured superiority, reveling in his global fame and notoriety. This incarnation of the iconic vampire shared qualities with a conceited celebrity, taking pride in his luxurious lifestyle and seeking admiration from those around him. Talk about narcissism. Despite his grandiose facade, Dracula concealed feelings of isolation and loneliness, masking his true emotions beneath a veneer of arrogance. His sense of identity was tainted by his status as a cultural phenomenon, rather than the feared embodiment of evil he aspired to be. This internal conflict led him to resent his image as a pop culture icon, sparking disdain for literary works like Stoker's novel. Dracula's physical presence mirrored the archetype of a vampire, and he donned traditional attire such as capes and aristocratic garments, reminiscent of the 15th century. He was a tall, athletic man with long, dark hair cascading just below his jawline. However, this visual allure was, in truth, a product of his hypnotic powers, enhancing his allure and mystique. Beneath this facade, Dracula's true form was that of an elderly man, marked by wrinkles, age spots, and a withered appearance. His white hair and aged features contrasted starkly with the alluring exterior he projected, and his ability to manipulate perception allowed him to shift between these two appearances at will. Of course, Dracula wielded an array of supernatural powers that were rooted in ancient magic. His considerable age gave him superior strength, enabling him to effortlessly overpower other vampires. Proficient in combat and weaponry, Dracula was adept in both hand-to-hand combat and sword fighting. Among the many powers he had, one of the more captivating ones was his ability to hypnotize people. He could manipulate minds, project himself into dreams, and even shape the behavior of those under his thrall. Dracula's control was limited to those with weaker minds or hidden desires. Clearly, the world of on-screen vampires is a diverse one, and has a wide spectrum of Draculas that range from bone-chillingly terrifying to humorously entertaining. It's clear that Dracula remains an ever-present and formidable figure. Across generations, Dracula's undead charisma has fueled the creative minds and the stories they produce with his supernatural charm and malevolent suave. As long as the night sky casts shadows and humans are enchanted with the notion of immortality, Dracula will continue to reign as a timeless and eternal antagonist, ready to emerge from darkness once more. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.